My name is Sriram and welcome to Math Helper. Today we're going to be factoring quadratic equations. So let's start with a couple examples. This is an easy one. X squared plus 2x plus 1. So the way I usually factor is I write the x and the x right here because x times x equals x squared, right? And what times what equals 1? Well, it's 1 times 1. So I have these. I have x, and then I have positive 1, so x plus 1. And this is x, and this is positive 1, so it's also x plus 1. So the answer, when you factor this, will be x plus 1 times x plus 1. So that's how you'd factor this equation. And the next one, I have x squared plus 5x plus 6. The same thing with the first one. This one will be x, and this will be x, because x times x is x squared. But here it's a little different. For 6, you could do 6 or 1, or you could do 3 or 2. So we have to figure out which one it is. We see here that it's positive. There's a plus sign here, and there's also a plus sign here. So that means that you can't have any negatives. Because if you had a negative here, just one negative, actually let me put it here. So if it was x plus 6 times x minus 1, this actually wouldn't work because 6 times 1, negative 1, is negative 6, not positive 6. So that couldn't work. So, and if you were to do that, 6, negative 1, that would get you positive 5. But the thing is, positive 5 and negative 6 are not there. It's just positive 5 and positive 6. So, what if we put the negative here? Same thing. We can't have any negatives right here. So, let's try, and then that would get you negative 5, so that wouldn't work as well. Let's try 3 and 2. If we have positive 3 and positive 2, 3 times 2 is 6. And 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. And is that a 6? Yes, and that is a 5. So it would be 3 and 2, positive 3 and 2. So the way we'd write that, x plus 3 times x plus 2. The order doesn't matter. You could do x plus 2 times x plus 3. This is where it starts getting a little harder. We have this 2x here. So that means that instead of just having x and x, we actually have 2x and x. That's the only way to get 2. You have to do 2 times 1, right? So we have 2x and x. And then what would we have here? Now we're going to have to do some experimenting because we have to do something where two numbers, when multiplied, get 6. And two numbers, when you add them, you get, you don't get 7 when you add them, but when you multiply them with these numbers, then when you add them, you get 7. So let's think about it. 3 and 2 do get 6. And again, you see here, these are both positive signs. So that means that everything is going to have to be positive in this. Let's see if this works. We are cross multiplying. So 3 times x, I'll do a dot here, is equal to 3x. 2 times 2x is equal to 4x. When you add them together, you get 7x. And that works because this is 7x here. So we would write as our answer 2x plus 3 times x plus 2. That would be our factored answer. Now this one is actually a little bit harder because this 8, it has a couple different ways. There are a couple ways you can write 8, right? You could do 2 times 4. You could do 8 times 1. So this one's harder. Let's try 2 times 4 first. 2x, 4x. And if we put those lines there, for 10, you could do 5 and 2, or you could do 10 and 1. And you see here, there are negatives here. So that means we're going to have a couple minus signs. But not even a couple, you can only have one, because if we have 2 minus signs here, that'll get us positive, because negative times negative is positive. So we can't really have that. So we can only have 1. But we don't even know where that is. So let's think. What if we did 5 and 2? Well, 2 times 2 is 4. And 4 times 5 is 20, and I don't think you can get negative 11 from those numbers. What if we flip it around? 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10. No, you can't get 11 from those numbers. So I feel like actually, let's try 10 first. So 10 and 1. Well, 20 and 4, you can't get 11. And should we even try the last one? It's kind of obvious that this won't work, because 10 times 4 is 40, and you can't, and 2 times 1 is 2, and you can't get 11 from 40 and 2. So I feel like there's going to be something wrong with these. So we can change this to an 8, and that can be just 1x or x. And let's try 5 and 2 here. Okay, so we got 8 times 2 is 16, and 5 times 1 is 5, and we can get 11 from that. But, so we need negative 11. So 16 minus 5 will get us positive 11, so we actually have to make a negative 16 plus 5, and that would be negative 11. So to get negative 16, we'd have to put a negative sign here, and there'd be a positive sign here. And writing the answer for this, we would, let me move this aside, it would be 8x plus 5, move it over, times x minus 2. And if you are unsure about the answer, what you can always do is you can FOIL it, which is basically multiplying it like this: forward, out, in, and last. So that's basically what FOIL stands for. Actually, not forward, it's first. First, out, in, last. Yeah, it's not really the greatest thing to see, but let's try it out. 8x times x is 8x squared. 8x times negative 2 is negative 16x. 5 times x is 5x positive. And 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. And writing it out, if we simplify that, we'd get 8x squared minus 11x minus 10. And is that the same thing as this? 8x squared minus 11x minus 10? Yep, it is. So now we know that this is correct. And this is the last one. We have 5x squared plus 4x minus 12. This one's actually easier than this one because there's only one way to get 5 when you're multiplying. It'll be 5x times x. But there are a couple ways to get 12. You could do 3 times 4, 6 times 2, or 12 times 1. So we have to figure out which one we want to use. And there's also a negative. So we have to figure out what to do for that. We know that there's going to be one negative somewhere. But if we have 2 negatives, then it would be positive. But we see this plus sign, so that means that when we're adding everything up, the total answer should just be positive, which should still be positive. So let's try it out. I'm going to do 6 and 2 first. Oh my goodness, my guess was correct. Because you see here, 5x times 2x, not 2x, it's 5x times 2 is 10x. And negative 6 times x is negative 6x. And when you answer that, you get 4x. So when you're doing these problems, you're not always going to get lucky like I got just now. Like when you were seeing me do this problem, I took a couple tries to get it right. But this one, I got it right the first time. So it really just depends on your luck. So let's write that out. 5x minus 6 times x plus 2. And we got that factored. So we're almost done, but I just wanted to explain one thing to you. You might be thinking, why are we factoring? What's the point of factoring? Well, the reason that you factor is actually to solve for x. So really, you could only solve for x when the whole equation is equal to 0. And then when you factor, you'd get x plus 1 times x plus 1 is equal to 0. And you might think, well then, how would I solve for x after you do that? You would write x equals, and then you basically move everything to the other side. To move something to the other side, you basically could just write it out like this. X plus 1 equals 0, And how do you isolate x? You would subtract 1 from both sides. So 1 minus 1 is 0, so you can just cross that out. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. So x would be equal to negative 1. And there's a second one here. But the thing is, these are both the same. So in the end, x would only be equal to negative 1 because this is also negative 1 when you are isolating it. So that's what this would be equal to in the end. Here, x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. We would get x plus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0. And to get what x is equal to, we would isolate this. X plus 3 equals 0. So x would be equal to negative 3 because we subtract 3 from both sides. And here, x plus 2 equals 0. So x would be equal to negative 2. So we could write that out as x equals negative 3, comma, negative 2. So that comma would act like an OR. So x is equal to one of those two things. For this one, this is a little more confusing, but in the end we got this when we factored it, right? 2x plus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0. So if we wrote it out, 2x plus 3 equals 0. It's a bit harder to do this one because you see there's a 2 there. But what you would just do, you'd make it 2x is equal to negative 3 because you subtract 3 from both sides. And to get rid of 2, we would just divide. So x would be equal to negative 3 over 2. And for here, it's easy. I'm not even going to write it out. We just see x plus 2 is equal to 0. So subtract 2 from both sides. And we get x is equal to negative 2. So we can put a comma here and put negative 2. You see, so later on when you are doing this, you don't even have to write out 2x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. It takes too long. You can just do it in your head. You could subtract 3 from both sides, and then you could just divide by 2, and you'll get negative 3 over 2. Here, when we add that equals 0, then we can move this over first. And then we move this over. Put that equals 0. So what we can then do, we just write x equals. This one's easier, so do it first. Just subtract. We not even subtract. We add 2 to both sides because negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So add 2 to both sides, and we get x equals 2. And here we actually have to subtract 5 from both sides. So 8x equals negative 5. And then we have to divide by 8. So negative 5 divided by 8 is negative 5/8. So this would be x equals 2 and negative 5/8. And the last one, when we add this equals 0, add this equals 0, we will see that x is equal to negative 2, because when you subtract 2, you'll get negative 2. And here, you have to add 6. So because negative 6 plus 6 is 0. And then 6 divided by 5 would be 6/5. And that's the answer. So there you have it. We have learned how to factor quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are just equations with x squared. So anyway, I hope you found this video interesting, and if you had any trouble with this topic, I hope that you find it a little easier to work with now. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section. But thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Bye!